Chapter 111. The Judge's Decision. The following morning, the military tribunals retired to debate their decision on the case. Neil, who was free thanks to millions paid as bail, returned to his house where he did nothing but angrily begin to scatter every single object he set his eyes on. He had known that a day would come when his mistake 2 years ago would come to light. He had looked forward to that, but he had thought he would at least be able to avenge his parents before he would pay for that. He would have willingly accepted his crime if he was only accused for the incident 2 years ago. But how could he accept the crime he hadn't committed? If he had wanted to kill them, why the heck would he write his own name on the wall and give himself away? If he had been the one to kill them, no one would even link their death to him because he was good at hiding his tracks when doing things. However, what bothered him the most was the words he'd heard in the courtroom about some innocent woman being killed in whispering way. Who was she? Neil ran his fingers through his hair in frustration. He had known the day his face was revealed on the live show that his enemy was going to get at him. And thanks to his identical looks to his late father, the person would immediately know him and bring him down. They couldn't have chosen a more effective strategy than bringing up the incident from 2 years ago, portraying him as a monstrous figure, which he believed he truly does deep down. When it came to the military, no amount of money could save him from this predicament. But then, who the heck murdered those 3? Neil asked himself the same question Kelvin Rodrigo was asking himself when he saw that Elizabeth, whom he had left 2 days ago, was killed along with the 2 students in Ivy Grove. The only thing he was responsible for was bringing out the incident 2 years ago to light. However, he didn't care because he was satisfied with the outcome, and whoever killed those people did him great. His laughter echoed throughout the room as he watched the news that had been talking only about the infamous Neil Weiner. Too bad his identity as Xavier Galvera wasn't brought to light and dragged down to the mud as well. Goodbye, Weiner. With you out of the picture, my business will strive even higher. Kelvin laughed in satisfaction as he watched Neil's cold face on the television where he was being questioned. By the next morning, when there was a knock at the door of Neil's house, frustration and suspense had twisted every muscle of his body into knots. He yanked the door open and frowned at the only friend he had ever trusted ever since he joined the military. Neil hadn't seen Liam at the trial because the young man had traveled along with his father for some business meeting after their operation failed in Ivy Grove. However, he had been thankful for that. Probably because he was humiliated, and probably because he didn't want the tainted image he now carried to rub off on the famous Thomas household. Now, Neil took one look at his friend's grim features and knew that he'd already discovered the news and had obviously flown to Zen because of it. "Don't look so happy to see me," Liam said dryly, walking into the room. He always had a friendly and bubbly personality, but now he looked all grim and serious because he knew where this would end. Though his father had warned him not to be seen with Neil, he had still come here to be with him, as none of the others were willing to stand by him after learning the truth of that incident. "I told you there was no reason to come here, Liam. You would only drag yourself into this, like that pussy," Jason had said. Neil countered, closing the door with a resounding bang as he was so furious at the mere thought of Jason Wallace. "My lawyers are working to solve the case right now. Everything is going to be fine." "In which case," Liam replied, undeterred by Neil's enthusiastic greeting, "we can while away the hours drinking and playing some cards." He shrugged out of his suit jacket, glanced at his friend's haggard features, and reached for his phone. "You look like hell, Neil," he said as he ordered an enormous breakfast along with drinks for them. Few hours later, Neil and Liam sat down on the couch of his living room playing cards and drinking, with Liam trying his best to lighten up Neil's mood. "Do you remember when my heartless father brought me to the military for the first time?" Liam began, reminiscing with a smile. "He thought he was making me into a man because I played with dolls instead of guns and cars as a boy. I used to be really shy in the camp until I met you. You inspired me to stand up for myself instead of hiding away." He clicked his tongue. "I also remember the times when you used to yell to my face by saying, 'Stop fucking following me around or I will break your head. Go and look for friends and stop being my tail.' You were so mean then. But I still chose to stick with you anyway. And just like before, I will always be there for you. In sickness and in health. In peace and in trouble." Neil raised an eyebrow, his voice dripping with sarcasm. "Are you trying to be my wife or what?" Despite his sarcastic remark, Neil was grateful to have a friend like Liam who cared more than his own uncle. He couldn't help but wonder how Liam was able to stick around him even after Neil had lashed out and slammed the doors in his face many times. I can be your wife if you want, Liam replied cheerfully, shuffling the cards. All you have to do is just get down on your knees and ask me to marry you. I'd be honored to be the one to thaw your cold heart. Who knows, maybe we can both try being gay just to be together since you don't want to ever give love a good try. Neil scoffed at Liam's comment. However, Liam continued to speak just so he could distract Neil's mind from wandering back to the punishment that would be decided on him. This is like the good old days in camp when we used to steal the commander's cards and hide them under our bunks so we could play. Except it was always nighttime we got to do that then. And Neil's life wasn't hanging on the balance. The unspoken thought swelled in the heavy silence, broken by the loud ring of Neil's phone. Neil picked up, listened to what the caller said, and stood up. I am being summoned back to the courtroom. I have to go. I'll go with you, we can use my car, Liam suggested while reaching for the car keys in his jacket pocket. It's not necessary, Neil declined, fighting down his panic. My lawyers are picking me up, he said as he walked over to a desk in his house office space. But I have a favor to ask of you. He took out a few formal documents from the drawer and handed them to his friend. I had this prepared just in case something goes wrong. It's a power of attorney granting you the absolute right to act on my behalf in the Galvera enterprise. You have the right to everything I own until I come out of this. And do me another favor. I want you to assist Mia Harrison with everything she would ever need with her studies. Liam looked down at the documents, and his color drained as this proved that Neil obviously thought there was a chance he'd be convicted for this crime. It's just a formality, a plan B. I'm sure you'll never need to use it, Neil lied. So am I, Liam said just as untruthfully and took the documents with slightly trembling fingers, which he masked by plastering an encouraging smile to his friend. The two men looked at each other, nearly identical in their height, build, and in their matching expressions of false confidence. As Neil reached for his suit jacket, Liam cleared his throat and reluctantly said, If I were to need to use this, what do you want me to do apart from sponsoring that girl? Looking in the mirror, Neil knotted his tie and said with a shrug and a lame attempt at humor, Just try not to bankrupt my company until I'm back, that's all. Hours later, in the military courtroom, Neil stood next to his attorneys and observed as the military judges reached a conclusion for his crime. Eventually, the head judge raised his gaze and announced, This morning, we received documents regarding Mr. Wayner's mental health, revealing that he has been suffering from a mental illness since his teenage years. This illness has occasionally caused him to act without awareness. The recent killing occurred during one of these episodes. However, this will not exempt him from facing justice. The judge's voice trailed off as he glanced up at the camera. Neil remained motionless upon hearing the judge mention his mental illness. He wanted to speak up and argue his innocence, but he knew it would be futile, because not even his lawyers were able to do so. As if the judge's words were distant echoes, he continued, guilty of first-degree murder. Following a brief trial to determine the punishment, Neil received an even more agonizing verdict. The punishment is a 50-year sentence to be served in Novaria's military, mental prison justice detention. Bail pending appeal is denied due to the sentence exceeding 16 years. Neil refused to wince or panic. He refused to do anything that might reveal the truth. The prison he was being sent to was known to have many military men with mental health issues. They would receive both treatments and punishment for their crime. Internally, Neil was screaming. But he maintained a rigid posture, even as someone forcibly grabbed his wrists, pulled them behind his back, and secured handcuffs around them. It was over. Chapter 112. Empty feeling. As the seasons turned, everything around changed. Leaves fell in autumn, snow covered the ground in winter, flowers bloomed in spring, and the sun shone bright in summer. Time flew by, and before anyone knew it, 5 years had gone by, leaving behind memories of all the moments shared. The city and houses were covered with snowplow trucks moving around and shoving the snow out of the road. However, inside a grand building, cameras and lights were being set, with two beautiful ladies sitting on the stage where two couches, facing each other, were set. One of the women was none other than Mia Harrison, who looked a lot different from how she looked when she was still a student at the university. She had bloomed into a more mature woman, with grace and beauty. The camera was focused on her, sitting poised and confident in front of a backdrop of falling snow, her brown eyes bright with anticipation as she prepared to interview one of the most famous female celebrities in the country, whom she had traveled all the way from Mirage Mesa to Novaria to meet. The soft glow of the studio lights illuminated her face, adding a warm contrast to the wintry scene outside the glass walls behind them. Mia smiled warmly at the camera and said, "Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our special Thanksgiving Day interview. My name is Mia, and tonight I have the pleasure of sitting down with the incredibly talented and lovely Aurora Quinn." The celebrity sitting opposite Mia had a radiating elegance and charm about her. She returned Mia's smile with a nod of greeting. "Thank you for having me, Mia. It's a pleasure to be here," she remarked sincerely, as any celebrity who had the privilege to be on Mia Harrison's shows would be more than honored. This was because Mia hadn't just made her name known in the entertainment industry throughout the years after she graduated from college, but she had won an award for being the best host in events and talk shows. Mia leaned forward, her eyes sparkling with enthusiasm as she asked, "So, Miss Quinn, as we celebrate Thanksgiving today, what are you most thankful for this year?" As the interview progressed, Mia effortlessly guided the conversation, peppering the celebrity with questions that elicited laughter and genuine emotion. The warmth and camaraderie between them was palpable, their chemistry evident to viewers who were watching from home. The female celebrity laughed genuinely as she answered all of Mia's questions. "You know, Mia, I have to say I'm incredibly thankful for the friendships I've made in this industry. Like ours, for example. Do you remember we used to be close in school until that event 5 years ago that took place on the stage of Ivy Grove?" Of course, she did. Though not all her viewers knew this, the beautiful woman sitting opposite her was none other than Carlos Mackenzie, but she had changed completely throughout the years. Mia's smile faltered for a moment, her eyes flickering with a hint of unwillingness to dive into any topic that had to do with the past. But then she quickly regained her composure. Chuckling nervously, she said, "Oh, of course, how could I forget? It feels like a lifetime ago." Aurora leaned in closer, her expression becoming more gentle as she took hold of Mia's hand. While her actions were sincere, she also wanted to demonstrate her closeness to Mia on the show, so that her competitors in the entertainment industry would see that they had a past connection. "I'll never forget that university event. Especially that kiss. I have a question that I'm curious about, and I know others are too, but no one has the courage to ask you because they're not as close to you as I am." She chuckled, covering her mouth with her hands before continuing. "Would you have kissed that man if you knew he was a murderer?" Mia's composed facade wavered slightly, her fingers gripping the fabric of her skirt tightly, but she maintained her composure and grace. Forcing a smile, she replied, "No, well, we all make mistakes, don't we?" As the interview ended and the camera was put down, Aurora stood up from her seat and embraced Mia warmly, catching her off guard. Although they had known each other in university, they hadn't stayed in touch after graduating 3 years ago, until Aurora became famous. Mia had gone to the trouble of traveling from Mirage Mesa, where she now lived, to Novaria because she learned that Aurora was Carlos, and she wanted to personally invite Aurora onto her show to boost her own career. Mia smiled and returned the hug. But before Aurora released her from the embrace, she whispered in Mia's ear, "Congratulations on your engagement, Mia. Mr. Sullivan is a fortunate man." Mia's eyes widened in surprise, her mind racing as she tried to process Aurora's unexpected words. Indeed, she had been engaged months ago, but it hadn't been publicly announced yet. She had wanted to keep it a secret, but it seemed gossips were getting ahead of her plans of keeping her personal life private. Aurora pulled away, her smile knowing and kind as she glanced at Mia's surprised expression. "Why do you look surprised? I saw the announcement on the magazine and look, you are wearing a diamond ring around your finger." Managing a shaky smile, Mia replied, "Thank you, Aurora. That means a lot." But deep down she was fuming at Owen for announcing their engagement without informing her. With a final exchange of well wishes, Aurora exited the stage, leaving Mia alone to gather her thoughts. She reached for her fur coat, her movements slow and deliberate as she gazed out at the snow-covered cityscape below while her team was packing up all the set. Mia walked towards the glass window, a whirlwind of emotions churning beneath her composed exterior. She heard her phone beep. She fished it out of her purse and saw it was a message from Owen. "Are you coming back today, sweetheart? I have plans for our Christmas shopping and I also have something exciting to share with you." Mia stared at the message with a blank expression. However, she couldn't help but cringe as she read the part, "sweetheart." Though she had said yes to Owen's proposal months ago, she could never get used to how he addressed her. If someone were to tell her years ago that she would marry Owen Sullivan, she would laugh and hit the person in the face, but here she was, engaged to him and about to be his wife after the winter season. Mia's thoughts took her back to a time years ago when she discovered her mother's lifeless body. Along with burying her mother, Mia felt as if she'd lost a part of herself. She felt adrift in a vast sea, unable to find true happiness ever since then. The realization that the person responsible for her mother's death had not only shattered her heart, but had killed her soul. She'd lived a life like that of a living ghost. She had attended classes because she didn't want to disappoint her late mother, who had wanted nothing but to see her become successful one day. For the years she had to graduate from Ivy Grove, people had done nothing but point fingers at her and call her names. They blamed her for the death of the two students. Countless times, she had gotten death threats from random people in the university. After her mother's passing, Mia had chosen to reside in the university dormitory, but each day felt like a living nightmare. She was consumed by misery and lost her zest for life, all due to one mistake: falling in love with a man she knew nothing about. That one mistake had almost caused her to lose her sanity if it weren't for Owen. Seeing that she was beginning to drown herself in her past memories, Mia shook her head and quickly replied to Owen's message. "The weather is terrible. No plane is flying back to Mirage Mesa. I plan to use my car and return tomorrow as soon as I can." She sent the message to him with her expression still looking blank and emotionless. Owen's reply was quick to come. "Driving all the way here is not safe with this weather. I can make some arrangements for you before tomorrow so you don't have to go through the trouble of driving. How about I come there?" Mia was quick to deny that suggestion. Though she had agreed to marry him because he had been the only person who came to stand by her side when she needed someone to lean on, she could never bring herself to love him the same way he did. And whenever he did things for her and tried to act clingy, she felt guilty and annoyed for some reason. Thankfully, he didn't insist on coming, as she knew he could be persistent at times. He replied with a, "All right. Just be careful. I will call you once I get out of my meeting. Happy Thanksgiving. I love you." Mia read his message, and without replying, she put her phone back into her purse and closed her eyes to take a deep breath. Happy Thanksgiving, indeed, she muttered to herself with a heavy, suffocating feeling rising in her chest. It was a feeling that made her feel like she was incomplete and nothing in this world could fill that huge void in her chest. But then she had to keep living and be the person her mother wanted her to be. "Everything will be okay, Mia. By the end of this year, things will change, and you will rediscover true happiness. With Owen by your side, you will soon be married and starting your own family." "That's a positive prospect," she murmured, attempting to hold back the tears that pricked her eyes and the constriction in her throat. "I wish." As she gazed out the window, a young man approached her from behind and greeted her. "Ma'am, your vehicle is prepared to move, and the snow has been cleared from the road. I have also arranged a room for you at the 5-star hotel in Novaria for this evening. If you need any additional assistance, I will take care of it. Are you ready to depart now? I can drive you." "No, Ken," she interjected hastily. "I will drive myself to the hotel. And there is no need for you to accompany me to Mirage Mesa tomorrow. I can find my own way back home." Home, she mused with a pang of bitterness in her heart as she accepted the car keys from him. She had no clear sense of where home was anymore, just as she was uncertain about the direction of her life. Nevertheless, she forced a smile, as she always did, concealing the hollowness gnawing at her soul, and exited the building, heading towards her red car parked outside. Chapter 113, At the Prison, Escape Plan. "Brother Neil," the whisper was almost inaudible. "What are you going to do if it starts snowing again tomorrow, like the weather forecast said?" asked a young man in his early 20s as he leaned down from the upper bunk and looked at the man who was stretched out on the bed below his, staring at the ceiling. "Brother Neil, did you hear me, or are you daydreaming again?" he added in a louder whisper to get his attention. Though at first Neil had warned him to stop calling him brother, Kai would never listen and continued to call him that until Neil no longer cared. Neil finally pulled his mind from the endless thoughts of his plans to escape and the risks associated with it. He slowly turned his head and looked at the 21-year-old boy above his bed who shared his cell in the Novaria military mental prison. "What did you say?" Neil asked, his voice detached from any emotions. Kai sighed and repeated himself. "I said, about your plans tomorrow. What if the weather doesn't act in your favor? Do you have a plan B?" Neil had been looking forward to his escape plan tomorrow for months now. It was something he and Liam, who had been helping him from outside, had talked about when he came to visit him last week. And the reason Kai knew about it was because the boy was from a very influential family with connections to some mafia world in Novaria. He had volunteered to help Neil by asking his elder brother to make connections for his escape. Kai was the last born of his family, and he was doted on by his parents, which had led the boy into becoming a gangster and had ended up in prison for his crimes. Neil had paid Kai's elder brother a fortune to pave the way once he made his escape tomorrow. He had done it on Kai's assurance that his elder brother would do anything as long as a huge amount of money was concerned. Kai had told him that, "Worry not, my brother would go against the devil as long as you have money. He will use my father's connection to help your plans." But Neil had no actual way of knowing for a few more hours if the money he had instructed Liam to transfer into the man's bank account was actually buying him his freedom at the moment. "I'll handle it," he replied flatly to the boy's earlier question about his plan B if the weather didn't turn out in his favor, then closed his eyes again. Kai pursed his lips and stuck his head lower to peek at Neil. "Well, when you handle it, don't forget you owe me $20. Last year we made a bet on that game night and you lost. Remember? I'll pay you after I get out of this hellhole. In case anyone was listening," Neil added, "someday in the future." With a boyish grin, Kai leaned back on his bed and took out the magazine he had been given earlier in the day by his elder brother, who had come to visit him. He crossed his feet at the ankles and lapsed into silence as he read the magazine with deep interest. Meanwhile, Neil, on the other hand, was in deep thought. $20 damn. Neil thought grimly, remembering when he used to hand out $50 tips to messengers and waiters as casually as if it was play money. But in this hellhole where he had spent the last 5 years, men killed each other for $1. $20 could buy anything that was available here, like cigarettes and magazines that help men pleasure themselves and prevent them from any act of perversion. Those were just a few of the little luxuries that money could buy in this place. Normally, Neil tried never to think of the way he had once lived, because it made this cell with a sink, a toilet, and 2 cots along with a desk even more unbearable. But now that he was resolved to escape or die trying, he wanted to remember his life. The memory would reinforce his resolve to make the break, no matter the cost or the risk. He wanted to remember the rage he felt the first day when the cell door clanged shut, and the next day, when a gang of thugs surrounded him in the prison yard, taunting, "Come on, General Wayner, show us how you got those badges in the military. We heard you never deserved them and it was your uncle who made it possible for you. Tisk, what a loser you are. Ha 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 ha." Neil saw red when he heard them laugh at his face. It was pure, blind, irrational fury that had sent him plowing into the biggest of the group. Fury and an unformed wish to end his life there and then, as quickly as possible, but not until he had inflicted pain on his tormentor. And he inflicted plenty that day. He would have killed them if he weren't stopped. By the time the fight was stopped, Neil had 3 broken ribs and a bruised face, but 2 of his opponents looked a hell of a lot worse than he did. One could barely even move from the ground. His triumph landed him in the punishment room for a week, where he was electrified with machines and forced to drink some filthy pills that messed with his system for days. But no one fooled with him again after that. Word spread that he was a maniac, and even the worst of the goons began to worship him. He was, after all, a convicted murderer, not an ordinary petty felon. That also won him a certain amount of respect, with men bowing at his feet in the prison. Every single morning, some doctors would come to check on them along with soldiers following behind them. Since they believed him to be mentally unstable, he was forced to take some pills, and when he misbehaved, it would lead to him being electrified. It had taken him 3 years to wise up and realize that the easiest path was to do as he was told and act like a gentleman, which also meant behaving himself and playing the game like a good little soldier. Any prisoner with good behavior would be granted the privilege to step out of the prison yard once a month. And he had done just that. He had even come to like some of the cons. But he had never, in all these years, known peace. How could he know peace when he was locked in here and the person responsible for his crimes was moving freely outside? Peace could only come with acceptance of his fate, and not once during his long imprisonment, not even for a moment, had he been able to do what convicts were advised to do. He could not accept his confinement and simply put in his time here. He had learned to play the game and pretend that he had adjusted, but the truth was just the opposite. The truth was that every morning, when his eyes opened, the inner battle began again, and it continued to rage until he finally fell asleep. He had to get out of here before it drove him insane and made him into the monster they called him. Neil's plan was solid. Once a month, higher-ranked military personnel, who made sure to visit the military prison, would be given the chance to take one of the well-behaved prisoners out to assist them with some things in the city. However, this time it was Neil's turn to get the chance to step out. And unfortunately for him, it was Jason Wallace who would be coming tomorrow to take him and Kai out for one day, which would be his first and last day to see the outside world. And Neil wanted to take the opportunity to escape. He had waited for this opportunity, and tomorrow was his first and last opportunity. Everything he needed to make good his escape had been arranged for him. Neil's jaw clenched. By this time tomorrow, he would already be free. Or dead. Now, he had to wait for tomorrow's outcome to know his fate, and he didn't know how he was going to bear the suspense. Closing his eyes, he went over the plan again. It was filled with pitfalls, but Kai was trustworthy, so he had help on the inside. Everything on the outside was supposedly taken care of by Kai's elder brother and Liam, who had arranged money, transportation, and a new identity for him to leave the city for a while until the search for him had settled. Then he would hunt down the bastard responsible for putting him here. At this point, what worried him the most were the things he couldn't accurately predict or allow for, like the weather and the location of possible roadblocks. Even with his careful planning, there were 1,000 tiny things that could happen and cause a domino effect that could result in the collapse of his entire scheme. The risk was enormous, but it didn't matter. Not really. He only had two choices: to stay in this hellhole and let it destroy what was left of his mind, or escape and risk the probability of being shot down when they tried to capture him. As far as he was concerned, being killed was infinitely preferable to rotting in here. Even if he made good his escape, he knew they'd never stop hunting for him. For the rest of his life, probably his very short life, he'd never be able to relax or stop looking over his shoulder, no matter what part of the world he made it to. It was worth it. Anything was worth it. Holy crap. Kai's exuberant shout jolted Neil from his preoccupation with his escape plans. She's getting married. He waved the magazine he had been reading in front of Neil, and when Neil merely turned his head and gave him a blank look, he said it louder. "Brother Neil, didn't you hear me? She's getting married." "Who's getting married?" Neil asked dryly. "I don't think whoever is getting married on that magazine is any of my concern, Kai." My crush. The woman we saw on the television in the lunchroom last year, the one I fell in love with at first sight." "What's her name again?" "Ah, I remember. Mia Harrison," he exclaimed as he jumped down from his bed and put his hands on his hips. "I remember your reaction to her face on television. I know you also believe that she's beautiful and fun. You had stared at her like you had never seen a woman on television before." "I am so—" "Shut the fuck up, Kai." Neil angrily yelled as he didn't want to hear anything about Mia Harrison's life and how great she was doing while he couldn't be out there to witness any of it. Earlier today, he had been listening to a podcast about her when he heard the person talk about Mia and what she said about regretting ever knowing him. He didn't want the words to get to him, but it had surprisingly struck a nerve. He was more than happy that the girl was doing just fine, but he hated his current situation so much he didn't want to know about her personal life any more than he wanted to know his fate once he got out of here. Neil watched Kai's face fall and instantly regretted his outburst. Despite Kai's having been charged with attempted murder in his first month of being a soldier, there was something endearingly childlike about the skinny little spoiled brat. Like Neil, he had been picked for good behavior, but his sentence was up in a month. Kai was arrogant as hell, always ready for a fight, but he was intensely loyal to Neil, whom he had looked up to as a teenager. When Kai was brought here, he had adopted him like an elder brother. Neil had thought he wanted to be left alone, and he made it clear to the boy by making himself scarce and pointedly ignoring him. But it was a futile effort. The harder he tried to shut him out, the more persistently he tried to make him talk. His family would come to visit him, and they would bring him a lot of goodies, and he would never forget to share them with Neil. Before Neil realized it, he had taken the boy as the little brother he never had and put him under his care in the prison, where he made it clear to the rest not to lay a hand on him. However, for the first time in years, he had raised his voice at the boy, observing the heartbroken expression in his blue eyes. In an attempt to retract his last hurtful outburst, Neil uttered with sincere remorsefulness in his tone, "Don't always trust what you read in magazines and news. They are often inaccurate. Your crush is not getting married to anyone," he reassured. However, deep down, he was also assuring himself. Exactly, Kai replied, nodding in agreement, his jovial demeanor returning. Those reporters sometimes fabricate stories. Once I'm out of here in a month, I'll find her and propose to her on my knees. Dear readers, starting from this chapter, things are about to get more interesting. It's time for you to read between the lines and piece together the clues. It's been 5 years in the novel, and months since I wrote the previous 2 chapters before this one, since I pulled them down and gave myself months break before writing this one and the others to come, and the characters may have changed. I didn't write all the chapters at once, there are months between them, allowing me to improve my writing. Brace yourselves, the story is about to get more intense. Thank you for joining me on this journey, and I hope you stick with me to the end to witness a love story like never before. Chapter 114, Protective. Mia's eyelids fluttered open, welcoming the gentle morning light that danced through the curtains, casting a warm glow across the hotel room she had spent the night in. With a soft sigh, she stretched her arms above her head, feeling the tension of sleep loosen its grip on her body. She hadn't been able to sleep well, as usual, last night until she took the pills recommended to her by her therapist 5 years ago. Without the pills, it was like she had forgotten the ability to fall asleep like a normal human being. Slipping out of bed, she padded over to the window, the cool wooden floor beneath her feet a stark contrast to the warmth of the covers she had just left behind. As she drew back the curtains, her breath caught in her throat at the sight before her. The city below was blanketed in a pristine layer of snow, the buildings and streets transformed into a winter wonderland. It was snowing again, she thought, as a soft smile tugged at her lips while she gazed out at the serene scene, lost in the beauty of the moment. But her reverie was interrupted by a scene unfolding down the street. A mother and her child stood on the sidewalk, the mother's hand gently tugging the reluctant girl towards a waiting car. Mia watched as the child's shoulders slumped in disappointment, clearly reluctant to leave the snowy playground behind. Though she couldn't hear their words, her heart went out to the little girl, as she recalled how she would plead for her mother to allow her to play in the snow despite the cold. Though not all of her childhood memories were clear in her mind, she still had all the childhood memories of her in whispering way with her late mother. "Mama, please let me build a snowman, just one little snowman, and I will run inside to get warm," she would plead while giving her mother her puppy eyes. "No, sweetheart, you will freeze out there. Would you like to see Mama cry because you fall sick from playing in the cold? Now be a good girl and let's get inside. If you behave well, you will get whatever you want for your Christmas gift." "Yay! I want a guitar for my Christmas gift." A pang of sadness gripped Mia's heart as she turned away from the window, the weight of another festive season without her mother heavy on her shoulders. Not a day would pass when she wouldn't miss the life she'd had with her mom. Though now she had achieved her dream of becoming famous, with many fans who sent her gifts and supported her, she would never feel complete again. Mia let out a deep sigh and pushed the troubling thoughts away, determined not to let them affect her mood. She reassured herself that there would be time to deal with her emotions later, then reached for her phone on the nightstand, only to discover missed calls from Rain. Mia had gotten into the habit of keeping her phone on silent due to the frequent calls she received from unknown individuals seeking reservations on her talk shows. Sometimes she wondered how they obtained her personal number instead of contacting her assistant to arrange for the reservation. She immediately returned Rain's call, and Rain answered on the second ring, her voice sounding strained and tearful. Concerned, Mia asked, "What's the matter, Rain? You sound like you've been crying. Is it another issue with Max?" She playfully mentioned Rain's boyfriend, knowing he had the ability to reduce her friend to tears whenever he ignored her calls and messages for days on end. Mia harbored a strong dislike for Max due to the pain he caused her friend throughout the years they'd been together. It soon became evident that Max was indeed the cause of Rain's distress. "I never want to hear his name again. I despise him so much, I wish he would fall dead and disappear," Rain exclaimed, her voice filled with raw emotion, surprising Mia, who had only spoken in jest. "What happened? What did he do?" Mia asked, surprised that her friend, who was crazy in love with Max for 3 years now, would wish for him to fall dead. Though Mia had never liked the young man since the day she was introduced to him because he gave her a weird vibe, she hadn't tried to interfere with his relationship with Rain as she saw how happy he made Rain whenever he was around. "Max cheated on me with that blonde-haired bitch, his secretary. I caught them both making out in his office. Mia, He cheated on me and he wasn't ashamed to say it to my face that I am a boring woman and he had no intentions of taking our relationship to the next level. Rain cried as she poured out her heart to Mia, who listened intently with anger swelling in her blood for the man. Don't cry over that jerk. He's not worth your tears. I'm coming back today, we'll talk more then. I'll swing by your place, and we can go shopping together. Forget about him, Mia reassured Rain, promising to visit before heading home where she knew Owen would be waiting for her, as she'd seen his message before calling Rain. Are you sure you'll come to my place first? Rain asked, her voice clearer. She sought confirmation since Mia rarely had leisure time anymore. The two friends hadn't enjoyed a shopping trip in ages because of their busy careers. I promise. I'm already making arrangements to return. You know I keep my word. See you in 6 hours, Mia assured Rain before ending the call to prepare for the lengthy drive back, since she had been unable to book a flight because of the weather, and she couldn't spend another day here when she had a lot of responsibilities back at home waiting for her. She quickly rushed into the bathroom to take a hot shower so she could start her journey back before Owen would send his men to come after her in Novaria. He could be protective to the point it made her question what the hell she was doing by agreeing to be his wife. But then when she thought about all the times he had stood for her, she couldn't question her choice to be his wife. He was the only family she had left now, and he loved her more than anyone had. Unknown to her that sometimes, things never go as one plans. Neil stood before a small shaving mirror above the sinks in the shower room of the prisoners, staring blindly at his reflection, trying to tell himself that Jason wouldn't change his mind about coming today, because Neil knew that the bastard would stop at nothing to make him even more miserable, despite his current state of despair. As Neil stood before the mirror, he observed Kai entering the shower room with an air of excitement, glancing cautiously over his shoulder into the hallway. Convinced that they were alone, Kai approached Neil and whispered eagerly, Jason has sent word that he's on his way and wants us to prepare before his arrival. This is our moment, brother Neil. Tension and impatience had been eating Neil alive for so long that he could hardly adjust to the fact that the payoff was actually here. 3 long years of pretending to go along with the system here, of becoming a model prisoner so they would give him the one day's freedom he'd longed for, and all the months of planning and scheming, everything was finally coming as planned. In a few hours, if there was no delay that would cause irreparable damage to his arrangements, he would be on the road in the car arranged for him with a new identity, and plane tickets that would lead the military on a wild goose chase in the wrong direction while he would be gone in a car. At the sink beside him, Kai said, Good heavens, I wish I could go with you. I'd sure like to be on the adventure of escaping from prison, just like in my favorite movie. You know the movie Escape Plan, don't you? I've always wanted to be in something like that. Neil bent down and splashed water on his face, but he heard the suppressed excitement in Kai's voice and it suddenly alerted him. He narrowed his eyes at the young man in the reflection and warned, Don't even consider it or let that silly thought linger in that head of yours. You'll be out of here in weeks. You must not try anything stupid, he added, yanking a towel off the rack. I'm not thinking about it, I'm just wishing I were you. What a lucky man you are. Kai grinned, his bright blue eyes sparkling in envy for Neil as if escaping prison was something to be envious about. But then, noticing Neil's glare from the mirror, he quickly cleared his throat and fished out something from his pocket while saying, You're right. Here, take this, he handed a piece of paper to Neil. What is that? Neil asked, wiping his face with the towel. He tossed the towel down and looked at the piece of paper in Kai's outstretched hand. This is my family's house address and phone number. If things don't work out like you planned, you can go to my family. They know how close we are and my brother and father will use the family connection to help you, he boasted. I know you have your doubts about whether my brother had made the arrangements for you, but in a few hours, you'll see that everything's waiting for you in the city, just like you want. He's a great guy, Kai added proudly. Neil took the paper and absently rolled down the sleeves of his rough brown prison shirt, trying not to think about anything now except each moment as it happened. But his hands were unsteady when he tried to button his shirt cuffs. He warned himself to calm down and concentrate on the conversation with the young man, who he had now taken as a little brother. There's something I've wanted to ask you for a long time, Kai, Neil said cautiously. If your family's this wealthy and has so many connections, why the hell didn't they pull some strings to keep you from doing hard time in here? Oh, that. You see, I used to be a very, very bad boy. I didn't listen to any words of my parents or elder siblings, so they thought I would learn some lessons after spending 3 years in here. Oh, I see, Neil drawled as he glanced at the boy. So, have you learned the lesson now? Kai stretched the back of his red hair and shrugged. I guess I've learned more than enough. I will never drink or smoke again, nor will I harass any woman again. That's a good lesson, isn't it, Brother Neil? He asked innocently. The tension that had been gripping Neil momentarily disappeared as he chuckled at Kai's words. He saw the innocent look on the young man's face. And because he couldn't help himself, he raised his hand and tousled his curly red hair. Yes, it is. Kai moved away from Neil's hand and rearranged his hair. You always like to do that. It's not nice, he complained with a pout, but he was smiling. Changing the subject, he said, it's a good thing that Mr. Wallace is brainless when it comes to your matter. It will make your plan easy. But, Brother Neil, have you considered cutting your long hair short? You would attract less attention when you're outside. I can assist you in cutting and styling it so that you'll be. Kai abruptly stopped speaking as a guard entered the shower room and slammed his hand on the door. Move it, Martinez, he snapped at Kai, who looked at him with a startled expression. You too, Wayner. Jason wants you outside in 1 minute. Chapter 115. Miss Beautiful. Neil and Kai were escorted to a room where guards placed ankle monitors on them to track their movements when they ventured into the city. Neil didn't even flinch as a tracker was inserted inside his arm along with the ankle monitor. After all, he was a dangerous convicted murderer. The military didn't want to take a chance with him escaping, which they believed would be impossible with them tracking him. But Neil thought it wasn't, if all the things he had paid for were arranged as planned. Good morning, Wayner, greeted Jason, casually leaning against his car and smoking outside the prison yard, which was heavily monitored by security cameras. Despite Jason's mocking tone, Neil paid him no mind and stood beside him with the red-haired boy who always trailed after him. Though several years had passed, Jason had hardly changed, still retaining his handsome appearance from 5 years ago. The only noticeable difference was his increased arrogance. Having no legitimate reason to be in Noveria, he had abandoned everything in Zen to make Neil's life difficult upon learning of his impending one-day release into the city. You're looking as grim and unpleasant as usual, I see. Before we go, Jason added as he moved away from his car and opened the door, where a huge black dog could be seen seated in the back seat. Take my dog for his walk around the yard. As he spoke, he handed Neil a leash that was attached to a large dog. I'm not your damned servant, Neil snapped through clenched teeth, and a slow, satisfied grin spread across Jason's smooth face. You tired of enjoying the beneficence and the freedom of a trustee? Are you getting an itch to spend some time in the punishment room, Wayner? I heard you quite seem to enjoy being electrified. Mentally cursing himself for letting his hatred show on a day when he had so much to lose, Neil glared at Jason and took the leash. Although Neil wanted nothing more than to punch Jason's arrogant face, he held back after hearing about the punishment room. He had been there once and he never wanted to step foot into it again. Prisoners who displeased any of the soldiers were brought there kicking and sweating in real terror. When they left, they were carried out either to solitary, the infirmary, or the morgue. Neil knew Jason was here to torture him on his last day out in the city. But then Neil also thought it was pleasantly ironic that it was Jason's ego that was finally providing him the means for his escape. And if his escape plans went as he had planned, then the bastard would have to face the military's consequences. With those thoughts in mind, a slow, wicked smile graced Neil's lips. Neil had started to turn around the corner of the yard when Jason called, Wayner, don't forget to clean up after my dog. You're not going to like it if any of the guards step on his crap. Neil stopped walking forward and walked backward, jerking the snarling dog with him towards a miniature shovel kept beside the wall. He buttoned his jacket and looked up at the sky. It was cold and the sky looked leaden. It was going to snow, he thought grimly. Not long after, Neil returned with the dog, and Jason threw the car keys at him and told him to drive. When Neil took the car keys, Jason smirked in satisfaction. Now seated in the back seat of the car, Jason took off his thick gloves and flung them on the seat. Then he loosened his tie, stretched his long legs out, and exhaled a satisfied sigh as he looked at the two prisoners in the front seat. He didn't like the red-haired boy just as much as he disliked Neil and Liam. However, Jason had no business with Kai. He had only traveled to Noveria with the sole purpose of tormenting Neil. In the past, Neil had disrespected him countless times. He had used Jason as a punching bag where he lost a tooth due to Neil's violent outburst. Additionally, Neil was responsible for the death of Jason's beloved cousin in the mall, along with other innocent individuals. Only Neil's death could bring Jason peace. It was almost unrealistic for Jason to be exacting his vengeance on Neil. The once renowned Neil Weiner, a wealthy tycoon who owned planes and chauffeur-driven Rolls-Royces, was now at Jason's beck and call in Novaria. There was justice in the world, Jason mused. Real justice. Jason had abandoned most of his responsibility in his father's company just so he could watch Neil suffer. There was nothing as sweet as watching the person you hate the most in the world suffering both emotionally and physically. Very soon, he was certain if Neil didn't die in here, he would go crazy from all the pills and injections fed to him. Even though Neil tried to hide it, there were times when Jason made his people pierce his thick skin and make him crack and yearn for what he couldn't have, but it wasn't easy. Even when the guards made Neil watch the news about the military and Jason's new promotion on television, Jason couldn't be sure that he had hit a nerve on the psychopath. With that pleasant goal in mind again, Jason cast around for the right topic to annoy him and randomly decided on sex. As his car braked to a stop at a traffic light near his destination, he said in a tone of pleasant inquiry, "I bet the women begged to get into bed with you when you were rich. And I remember how you used to pretend to be uninterested in them like some saint, didn't you, Weiner?" He taunted. "How about now? Do you ever think about women, about how they used to feel and smell and taste? You probably didn't like sex that much. Tisk, you lose. By the way, I heard that girl, what was her name again?" Jason tapped his index finger against his chin as if he was trying to remember the name he knew clearly. "Ah, I remember. Mia Harrison. Did you see how much she has moved over you? If you'd been any good in bed, she wouldn't have forgotten you and discarded you like some garbage. What a loser." In the rearview mirror, Jason watched with satisfaction as Neil's jaw tensed slightly. He assumed it was his indirect insult about Neil's performance in bed that got to him, and not the woman's name. Meanwhile, Kai, on the other hand, looked taken aback at the mention of his brother Neil knowing the woman he'd been crushing on television. But not to gain Jason's attention, he didn't say a word and remained silent. Jason continued speaking. "If you ever get paroled, which I know you would never get, you'll have to settle for hookers when you get out. No woman of high class would settle with you unless you pick one from the lower class. But even the low class have some class, and they don't like dirty ex-cons in their beds. Did you know that?" Despite his taunting words, Neil maintained a smooth facade. Only his clenched jaw betrayed his anger. However, Jason wasn't satisfied that he was being ignored by someone as low as a prisoner. Not giving up, he continued to taunt. "I remember you used to be a fucking wastrel in camp because you had your uncle's backing. And now, look at you, even my chauffeur has a better life than you. Your uncle has forgotten about your existence now. He is living his life as if you had never been a part of it. He hated people mentioning your name in his presence, because you are a fucking loser and he's very disappointed in you." Neil's hands tightened around the steering wheel as a vein throbbed on his forehead. And when their destination came into view, Jason straightened his tie under his coat as he said, "Even that motherfucker, Liam, has made new friends. When last did he come to visit you?" In answer to his stupid question, Neil slammed his foot on the brake and brought the car to a teeth-jarring stop in front of their destination, causing Jason to drop the paperwork he was here to submit on the car floor. Swearing under his breath, Jason bent down and collected the papers that had slid onto the floor and waited in vain for Neil to get out and open his door. "You fucking son of a bitch. You think you're still the boss here? I'll deal with you when we get back to the prison. I will watch you bleed to your death in the torture room. Now get your ass out of the car and open my door," he snapped. Neil got out, ignoring the biting wind that whipped his thin white jacket off his shoulder. His only concern was if the things he had paid for his escape were ready. He couldn't go anywhere with the monitor and tracker on his body. In 10 more minutes, he would be on the run. With a mocking ease, he jerked open the back door of the car and gestured wide with his arm. "Can you get out on your own, or shall I carry you?" "You've pushed me for the last time, Weiner," Jason warned, getting out and yanking his bag off the seat. "I will teach you a few lessons when we get back. Mark my words." Reining in his temper, Jason glanced at Kai, who had been quiet the whole time and was staring off into space, trying to look meek and deaf. "Red hair. You have your errands list for the soldiers. Get them done and get back here before I'm done. You," he turned towards Neil and ordered, "get your heated head over that restaurant across the street and buy me some nice hot chicken soup, then stay in the car until I am done with my business here." And don't even think for a second that you can go far with those trackers on you. There are people watching you and tracking your movements. Without waiting for a reply from Neil, Jason headed towards the huge skyscraper building in front of them. Behind him, the two men stood watching his back, waiting for him to enter the building. "What an asshole," Kai said under his breath, then he turned to Neil. "Brother Neil, I really despise him so much. I wish I could blow off his brain. Damn, I hate the way he talks to you. If I get out of prison soon, I will make sure I hunt him down." Neil shot the red-haired boy a look. "Do anything stupid, and you'll find yourself back in prison." Kai pouted his lips, but then seeing that Jason had disappeared into the building, he said to Neil, "This is it, I guess. Good luck." He glanced up at the dark, snow-filled clouds and added, "By the way, you never told me you personally knew Miss Beautiful, I mean Mia Harrison."